I think they're here, not only is it a very impressive program with great results, but so much kind of care and thought goes into how they implement. They're very rigorous and very considered. And you can especially get that in the guidance that we're going to be talking about today. And I think the guidance is very rich as well because it's written by implementers for implementers. There's so much experience teeming through its pages from real experience. So I think you'll get a lot out of that. But a kind of second point that we're focusing on this great guidance here, but if you have something to share as well from your own programs, please let us know. Perhaps we can help promote that or get some feedback on that. And indeed, this webinar, a bit of the point in addition is to get some feedback from yourself about if this kind of program, if this kind of webinar format, if manuals help you in your work. So there will be a survey at the end of the webinar, and it's particularly important to us that you fill that in, just a few minutes. The webinar is 30 minutes, so there'll be 15 minutes or so of Helen speaking, followed by some questions and answers. So you can start thinking about those questions and how to make Helen's life tricky. Just a few things about the interface in front of you, in case you haven't used it before. The first thing is you'll see there's a chat box where myself and Sarah have introduced ourselves, and we're feeling pretty lonely. So if you guys could kind of write in there your name, your organization, where you're based, any fun fact in that chat box, that would be great. But also, as the webinar goes along, if you have questions that you would like to be raised, we'll probably answer them at the end of the webinar, but please ask them there. And if you have any technical problems, if you could just kind of put them there, your microphone's not working, my microphone's not working, that would be great. The presentation and the recording of this webinar will be available on the Beam website at the end of the webinar. And of course, the manual that we're talking about and a case study I briefly mentioned are available on the website as well. So we'll send you some links to those at the end. Leaves me nothing else than to pass you over to Helen. Helen?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Ashley, for your very kind words. And 15 minutes is quite quick, so I hope that I can convey something useful in that time. Thanks for inviting me to speak and to talk about this manual. It was quite interesting to me that you found it useful and interesting, and I'm glad, because having read through it again for the purposes of this webinar, I still like it, so I think that's a good sign. A little tiny bit about us. We're based in the Republic of Georgia. We're an SDC-funded program implemented by Mercy Corps Georgia. And we've had great luxury of longevity. So we've been going since 2008 from one region, spread to 3, and as the changes have really started happening, then they've gone all over Georgia, and also they've sort of gone outside of Georgia now as well into export. We're a livestock program in the dairy, meat, honey and sheep sectors, working on the input side, working in the core functions, and working also a lot with rules and complex governance interventions, and we do a lot with women's economic empowerment. So, as I say though, we've had the luxury of longevity, so I'm going to focus a little bit in this presentation on not just what the manual is, as in, what's written down, because it's a manual, and the whole point of a manual is that it's self-explanatory, and it's easy, and it should be easy to read. And I'm very happy to say that it is easy to read, because I reread it the other day and I thought, oh, this is all right. It's not a huge number of pages for the core part. There's a big chunk on procurement, which of course has to be in there. But if you don't have to read that, because every organization has different procedures. But the main core of the core guidance is not very long, so it might be just worth a read. I should perhaps say that this manual was developed. There's a real balance of what you have to do as a program and what you want to do and aspire to do. And so this manual really encapsulates all of that, and I'll move on to that in a second. So the other thing I should explain is that the funding part of the program, the actual part where we give money to people or we co-invest with people, comes from something called the investment support facility. So in our budget, we don't have line items at all. We just have a fund, an investment fund. And to maintain that and to keep our privilege of having that and the freedom to use it, we had to develop rigor so that the donor and our own implementing organisation felt happy with the level of risk, potential risk, and managing that risk. So it's a real, it does many things, this manual. So I'll move on to its functions. So it does have multiple functionality. Very, very early on in some of the discussions with the donor, the mission director that we had at the time had been a consultant and knew about working with clients and working with people in the field. And what we were basically trying to explain at the time, because they were saying, how do you know? How do you know when it's the right thing to do? How do you know when these people are okay? And we said, well, a lot of it's gut feeling. We just know it's okay to do it this way. We had to try and break that down, because if we couldn't break down what we meant by gut feeling and what made up gut feeling, then it meant that we were going to lose some of our control over the program, because the donor in particular would get nervous. So the manual on one level tries to codify facilitation and this gut feeling. What makes up your experience? What makes up your ability to say, yeah, this is a good one or not? And so that's a sort of overarching theme that runs through the sections of the manual, apart from procurement, and to just say, well, why do you choose this client over that one? And how do you go about negotiating the deal with them? The relationship, it's not just about money, this. I mean, the core of the whole thing of a successful intervention for us is the relationship between the client and in our case, the business development officer, who is the real interface. This is what's often left out, I think, of discussions in development, is where it really, really happens. And this is the interface. And this relationship is so important, this client program relationship. It's the nexus of the whole thing. So that's in there. It obviously has to have tools and processes. So it says, it's the how-to of how it works. It's got the tools. It's also got templates in the back. These will be obviously particular to our program and our context. I've mentioned this already, and it's really important. It has to balance the have-to, the compliance, the due diligence, and the accountability versus what we want to achieve as a program. And obviously, the most important thing to me, anyway, as the team leader, is I want to affect change. I want the program to run with a minimum resistance and hassle. But at the same time, and I am accountable to my own organisation and to the donor, and so I have to have the tools to deal with this. And this manual provided the framework for this. Hence the big section on procurement, hence the mention of monitoring and evaluation in it. It also negotiates and bridges, I think, the complex development environment, in our case, of course, specific to us, but all of us work in environments where we have to balance the needs of the donor, the particular development objectives in the country we work in, and also the objectives of our own organisations, and then at the same time balance running a market systems development programme in the field, which requires a lot of drive and a lot of energy. This document was really key in doing that when we developed it, and I'll go on about that a bit more in a minute. And this is a fixed point within other fixed points that we use to navigate the program. So we have a monitoring and evaluation manual. We have women's economic empowerment guidelines. We have our biannual and annual reports. These are fixed points to which we can refer if we need them, and they form like a matrix in between which we operate. You know, for me, the most important thing when I'm programming is that the interventions are as efficient as possible, that the resistance is low. But what's interesting, I think, when you run a program is at the beginning, often at the beginning of programs, the amount of energy that you're actually putting into making an intervention work, pure energy into really enjoying that facilitation, is not high enough. You're often dealing with all sorts of issues from all over the place. And I think that can be a real problem for many programs starting out. Writing this manual and starting to codify our experiences meant that this resistance was reduced. And I think that I wanted to do this webinar in particular because I thought, well, if there's stuff that can be taken directly from this manual and applied by other people, it could help reduce that resistance that they encounter at the beginning of a program and help more energy go into programming. So this was just really, this part here was to talk about this issue of how this developed over time. I'm really hoping for most of the people listening that things have moved on quite a bit since 2008. The Beam exchange, as a case in point, the fact that there's so much more guidance, there's more practical lessons, there are more tools, there's more discussion, and there's more acceptance that market systems development is normal. It's more mainstreamed now. Elements of it that might have been quite out there in 2008 no longer are. So I don't think many people would have to go perhaps through so much of what we went through in the beginning of the program. I know this reads a little bit like a spa menu, but that's just the way it worked when I was writing the presentation. But in the beginning, the program outlook was intense. We really, the people running the program wanted to make it really work. But it was of necessity quite defensive, because things like negotiating how we were going to fund people, what type of people would be funded. There was a lot of discussion over who the poor were, who the target group was. Did you need a massive baseline survey or not? These were all the sort of discussions going on. Everything was discussed. There was a lot of resistance, therefore, in implementation. And of necessity, it was quite an introverted outlook at that point. Processes were evolving. How do you develop your selection criteria? How do you develop your funding mechanism? How do you explain that to the donor when they've never done that before? So that was an interesting period, and obviously trying to build quite a bit of trust. The second phase was one where we could be more. There was more energy. It was more still protective of the program, but outgoing, and the resistance then became more variable. And in this phase, we could revisit things like the tools we've developed, so the application form and the investment plan, which are key parts of our process. These were revisited and rewritten and adapted and became fit for purpose. The first manual was written in 2011, and when I look at it now, it seems very simple and quite sweet in many ways, because it was very, very front-ended, as I've written there. It was about the market analysis, the application procedure, and the investment plan, because of course we hadn't done the programming then really to enable us to know what we were talking about later on. What we were able to do as time has passed, of course, is start to codify the lessons about facilitation itself. And these are the favorite parts of the manual for me, where we've actually managed to start writing down what what facilitation really is and what it means to us. And that's really useful. It takes it away from being rather formal thing of just saying, right, this is how you fill in an application form and this is what you should do and this is who you're accountable to actually real guidance and real lessons. So because I was doing this webinar, I went around a few people on the team and I asked them, do they use this manual still? Is it useful and how? I knew that most people would say they don't use it very often now, because the reason being a lot of the people in this photo were on board through the development of all the things that are in it. So it was a process where we developed this manual together, so they know it. But the answers that I mainly got were that they know it's there and they use it to double check things. They use it when they're maybe going into a new sector or an activity they're not quite sure of, or a new value chain, and they go back to just double check and refresh. It's always used as well with new people coming on board on the team, and it's an easy thing to give them to refer to. Yeah, and in management again, it was mainly for new programming and just to check and double check. As for the donor and our implementing organisation, Mercy Corps, they know it's there. They can, if we do have times when it's a bit up and down about procurement, we're always trying to push it. We are an M4P programme after all. We want maximum flexibility. Procedures are difficult. And they can be cumbersome because a lot of development organisations perhaps don't have tailor-made processes that work for M4P specifically. So anyway, but they know it's there and they are reassured by the presence of this manual. So finally, I would say, that my favourite bits, I would recommend to read part 5 in particular, which is where we talk about additional funding and the risk management, the actual process of negotiation and the guidance that has been written on it. I like the workflow diagram. It was hell to develop, but it does show all the moving parts, M&E, the program, the client, and the processes all in one diagram. So I like that quite a lot because you can point to it and it's easy. And in preparing for this webinar, I read the thing again, and of course what's true is it's a living document, and I can see where it can be improved and again, and so we'll do so. I will update it again, and so it's of more relevance to the team again. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Helen. Very insightful, very useful. Thanks very much. So I just want to say to the audience, there's a couple comments I want to make here. But if you could start thinking about any questions you have, because in a couple of minutes we'll open it up. But we also got some questions in advance. So anything you'd like to ask. I'm imagining that you're extremely busy people, that some of you will have read this. Some of you are now thinking, this is exactly what I'm going to do this evening on the commute home. A couple of things that I really like about it, and I've kind of written this down. One, I like the kind of clarity around it. I mean, there's some of these things that are very difficult, you've kind of really brought down into quite understandable, kind of deceptively simple pieces around on page 15 around the eligibility criteria for applicants, or on maybe it's page 32 perhaps about no, maybe it's not that, but there's another page that's very nice about the things that you will fund and the things that you won't fund, the kind of heuristics you use, and you put it there. What I like as well is how it really comes out that it's from the implementers. I think there's a nice example on page 32, which is around how you learned about some of the challenges of working with businesses based in the city that may think they understand rural dynamics, but they don't really. And that reminds me of when I was in Georgia, you told me about kind of some work with a City Boy milk processor. But there's kind of real experience coming in there. The last thing I want to turn around into a question is what I really like about it, in addition to the simplicity and the reality, is that you're codifying very kind of complicated stuff that I haven't seen in many other places. in particular the use of additional or financing or kind of secondary funding. And I was wondering if you could perhaps on that point, which is around page 25, just kind of talk us through an example of when you have used kind of secondary funding to facilitate scale.
Okay, thanks, Ashley. Yeah, secondary funding, of course, this is a hot topic. And over the years, we had some real ups and downs, of course, in our discussions about funding, because the natural desire, I think, from many donors is to control it, to want more control. And then the pushback from the program side is to want more freedom. And one of the things we just had to get over was that we couldn't do this very neat and tidy. In real life, it's not that neat and tidy. You can't just fund someone once and then think that's going to just really work. And similarly, I think there has been sometimes this idea that you fund one, and then that starts off this sort of demonstration effect, and then you get your crowding in, and then perhaps you fund another somewhere else. But in our context, in a very thin market, or perhaps when there's only one viable player, or perhaps when other funders are funding others, so it's distorted environment anyway. The only people who are generating the real stuff that you want are people you've already funded. So we had to tackle this issue of this secondary funding and codify it in a way that was acceptable to the donor, which meant really saying why we were doing it. And of course, to justify that, scale is the main one, and the reasons I've just said. Really good example, of course, and an easy one to point out is the veterinary input supply work that we've done, which is written down in your Beam Rocky case study. They were just the only viable player really in this, and they were also not forming a monopoly. You have to be careful. You have to consider that you're not, by funding someone again, you're not barring other people or giving them an unfair advantage. So you have to weigh all these benefits. But they were people who, because they don't operate on a franchise system, but the people who they supply, the little vet pharmacies they supply, are independents. Other input suppliers were also supplying them. So you were growing the market anyway. Another example would be a couple of our dairies who have done very, very well, who were expanding so rapidly, and some of those have gone to export now. We even have one who, when we first met them years and years ago, operating from a cowshed, said their dream was to export to America. And of course, we tried not to laugh a bit and, said, let's concentrate on the home market. But they really are exporting to America now. Indeed, Los Angeles at the moment, which is very funny to us, but great. And so they were a real candidate because they had that ability to grow, but also provide a lesson to other, they were a great example for other dairy factories to follow.
Okay, Helen, thanks very much. In a second, I'm going to ask you another question around gender. So I have 4 questions that were sent in advance. I'm going to go through those. But I think if anyone does have any questions, there was some confusion around the interface in the beginning because the chat area wasn't up. But just go into the chat area and put those there rather than a Q&A. But one question that came in advance that is perhaps less around the guidance, but it feels very important, was from Helena Ahmed at Propcom McCarthy, who just wanted to asking how does one effectively guide the partner towards making its products or services more inclusive of women? And perhaps if I can pass that one over to you, Helen.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. I think as you start at the very beginning, as someone once said. I mean, first of all, you have to have a team it starts from the team building, where everybody's, really aware of what they're doing. It starts from sector selection anyway, that it's a sector that's got the opportunities for women, in that sector anyway. And I think if it has, then you're onto a good thing, because it's also about who you select as your client in the first place. I mean, we we made some real mistakes early on, I think, with people who, and that's in the manual, those are in there in the co-investment guidance section, which is on page 31, where, for example, we had a guy who was a brilliant cheese technician, but he was a useless business person. And you know, we were so desperate to have something in a particular part of the value chain, we kind of, you know, and the person was in that place, a business was in that place, that we ignored other things that we knew they weren't so good at, and we tried to push it. If you're not pushing and you've got someone who's really good anyway, and women are key to that value chain, let's say dairy in Georgia, then it's going to be pretty easy. You know, there's not going to be much convincing. Here in our dairy work, it was basically the quality of the milk from small scale suppliers who were women that was the issue. And sorting out that quality, and we you know, did all sorts of things in the food safety and hygiene consulting service sector, and that's really revolutionized it. And the factories don't need persuading of that. But it's the way you structure your intervention, so you make sure, well, I know most of the people working in your factory are women. We want to do a training on food safety and hygiene. I need to make sure that all those people are coming to the training, and I'm not just going to talk to the manager, for example. That would be a very basic example.
Okay, Helen, thanks so much. I can see Halima is currently typing, so maybe you've hit the nail bang on the head, or maybe she has a follow-up question. The next question is it's kind of a combined question that came in from Lucio Osorio and Mary Morgan, and so it's really about the impact of the guidance. So you're in a webinar here, so you get all the questions are kind of left, right, and center. So sorry for that. But Lucio wanted to know, I mean, I know you talked about this a little bit, what has been the impacts of a manual on the team performance? And perhaps building on that, Mary Morgan asked, what sort of capacity building is required? I can't see the full question here. What sort of capacity required, and I know you put a lot of effort into capacity building in your program, is required for field staff to understand and use this framework? Did you find that field staff had a hard time using the framework?
It's not so much, capacity building them to use the framework, because as I think I said, it was developed, you know, through, you know, we developed it together. But yeah, I have brought a whole new office online in that time, and it's not just about this one piece of this one manual. This is just one thing. I mean, that was about the whole, bringing them on the whole ethos of market systems development, of results chains, of low visibility, of everything really. And I think that this is only, as I think I'd said in the beginning, this is just one part of a set of fixed points. And between those fixed points, there is just this constant interaction. The thing that's characterized our team is that there has to be a constant and ongoing communication between everybody. And it is a lot of hard work, but it's also very satisfying. I mean, we wrote in the Rocky case study about market analysis, and how for new staff members, market analysis is the first thing they do, and it's where they start to learn. You know, that's where they really get their chance to go out, you know, speak to people, start learning about the countryside, start learning about the urban markets. And so it's just ongoing. But it's, as I said, people do refer to this, they do know it's there, and the fact that we developed it together iteratively, and the experiences of everybody who've gone back into it, makes it relevant to them. So it's a very important part of the success of the program.
Okay, thanks very much. So I think we have one last question here, and then we'll close up. So this is from Steve at the ILO, and I just got this in, so I'm reading this in real time. Did you find that evaluating investment with objectivity was difficult in consideration of the emotional ties that program team members develop with potential partners? I.e., field staff might give a better valuation to partners if staff like them from a personal perspective or want to help their businesses. If so, are there checks that you can recommend to keep the valuation objective?
That's a really good question, but I have to say something, that we like them more if they're good. So It's funny actually how it goes right back to this initial market analysis, to the values you've got in your program, and even looking around some of the issue of adaptive management, how we recruit our teams and who we've recruited. I mean, there's a whole pile of effort that goes into recruiting local people, recruiting people who aren't necessarily from a development background. We recruit based on things like open-mindedness, ability to think flexibly, wanting to be innovative. And so the other thing we have, the checks and balances side, is we do have bi-monthly monitoring action plan meetings. So all the business development officers have to be involved in managing the data for their interventions. And every 2 months they have to sit and report on their figures, for their particular portfolio, let's say dairy or slaughterhouse or veterinary input. And then you've got the whole team sitting around saying, well, hang on a minute, you keep saying that so-and-so is really good, but why are their figures, a pile of rubbish for this, this monthly period? And that's your the check and balance. The fact is, all of this is in a big feedback loop, and a lot of that comes too from it. We did do the DCD audit. We're doing another one, and that requires that management feedback, monitoring and management feedback loop, and that's a big part of it.
Okay, thanks very much. It's just gone a little bit after past. So Helen, thanks so much. We'll close the webinar there. Just to end with a really massive thanks to you, Helen. Thanks for all your time and really volunteering your time. We're very appreciative. Got a lot out of it, and thanks to everyone for attending as well. I really appreciated. What I wanted to say, as mentioned, we're sending around a survey. I mean, we always have surveys in our webinars, but we'd really especially appreciate if you could fill this one in, because this is a new format for the webinar, and we're thinking about if we should do more on these lines. The manual, the link has just been shared, so I think for a lot of you there's some kind of new reading to do, or to kind of look into it and find the things that you really like, and we'll be sending you links to Helen if in case you have any follow-up questions about particular issues. But also the recording and the presentation will be available shortly on the Beam website, and we'll send you a link. We also received the question from Nasanya Nandashau from Business Link Tanzania asking about success stories or market system development. And although that's not the primary goal, there will probably be a webinar. Hopefully we're going to come back to Helen maybe in February to look a bit deeper into some of the alliances at work. So hopefully there'll be more we can share around here. I think that's everything from me. Thanks to everyone. Hope you enjoyed the webinar. Look forward to seeing you soon. And yeah, have a great rest of the day. Thanks very much.
Thank you.